Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here, and the state of Trump's proposed 28-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. There's been some developments. I mean, of course, one at the end of last week when Zelensky's right-hand man and chief of staff, Yermak, resigned after anti-corruption watchdogs raided his home and office. We'll talk about that momentarily, but the larger discussion of the proposed peace plan and the talks that are ongoing, particularly in the face of criticism from the chicken hawks of the left, seemingly always banging the drums for war, even as they're posturing as peacemakers. Interesting piece in Time magazine by a British journalist who's also a visiting professor at King's College, Anatol Levin. He writes, "The stakes are enormous. If the peace talks fall apart, a war that has claimed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian lives will grind on. And there's a real risk that Ukraine's military position will worsen, if not collapse. U.S. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll reportedly warned Kyiv as much last week as Russia stockpiles enough long-range missiles that could deliver a knockout blow. The warning comes amid ongoing concerns about Ukraine's manpower shortages and Russia's seemingly endless ability to sustain the war." He goes on to say, "It's important to stress that while the original draft plan entails some painful concessions, it does not represent Ukrainian capitulation to Russia's war of aggression. Compared to the Russian hope at the start of the war for the total subjugation of Ukraine and the past 400 years of Ukrainian history, it could indeed be called a qualified Ukrainian victory. Almost 80% of Ukraine would remain free, independent, heavily armed, and with an accepted path to join the EU, were this plan to be ratified by both sides." For more perspective on this, please be joined by Justin Logan. He's the Director of Defense and Foreign Policy Studies at the CATO Institute. Justin, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
What do you think about that perspective that I just recounted?
Yeah, I should confess Anatol is a friend, but I basically agree with the analysis there. The dilemma that Kyiv faces at this point is that it needs more of everything at a time when there is less of everything. It needs more Patriot missiles at a time where U.S. inventories have been drawn down dramatically low. It needs more money where there's not likely to be any sort of supplemental bill in the Congress in the foreseeable future. And the Europeans, who've cast aspersions on the Trump peace plan, announced today that they don't have a plan to seize Russian frozen assets and use those as a way to fund Ukraine. So you mentioned also the sort of corruption probe that sacked Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's very close top advisor, really. So Zelensky is facing pressure on the battlefield. He's facing pressure in terms of corruption investigations, and he's running out of resources. And so there's just a confluence of things that is driving Zelensky to countenance outcomes that he would have rejected out of hand even as recently as a year ago.
Yeah, which is often how wars come to an end, right? The other thing that he that is troubling and is not helpful to him is that a court in Germany issued an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian in relation to the 2022 bombing of the Nord Stream pipelines in the waters near Denmark and Sweden, which both the Ukrainians and, more importantly, the Biden administration had suggested that was done by Russia, that Russia blew up its own pipeline. It seemed implausible, and now we're getting to the point where it may become obvious that it was a Ukrainian operation. And so then you have the additional cynicism about this sort of false flag operation, if this is what it was, and the Biden administration lying to the American people, and that's not going to excite Republicans to do any more for Zelensky than they're already doing.
Yeah, I mean, you used the word there that I use most frequently in talking about the European approach to this whole mess, which is cynicism. The Europeans in general are using the Ukraine war as a way to keep the United States tied down in Europe when there are signs that the Trump administration wants to shift the defense burden to the Europeans themselves. And when it comes to the Poles protecting this gentleman who allegedly took part in blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, there's just a tremendous amount of kind of hubris here. I mean, what you had was an attack on a NATO member state's infrastructure, an armed attack, right? And the Poles are just basically saying, we find this matter is closed and Germany should never have been buying Russian gas in the first place. So there's a sort of hubris or arrogance here. The German economy has been in recession for years and remains there. And the Poles are saying, if you don't like it, lump it. And so I think there is a real tension between the desire to pursue NATO unity and the ambition and, in some cases, aggression, apparently, of people who are supposed to be on the same side.
Let me ask you about another matter, and that's the strikes against the narco terrorist boats, including this controversial early September strike where apparently the order was given, no survivors, and there was a second strike to ensure that, although that's disputed. This is what Caroline Leavitt, the White House press spokesman, said under questioning on the topic yesterday. Take a listen.
The strike conducted on September 2nd was conducted in self-defense to protect Americans in vital United States interests. The strike was conducted in international waters and in accordance with the law of armed conflict.
So was the initial order from Secretary Hegseth, everyone be killed, and did that come from President Trump?
I saw that quoted in a Washington Post story. I would reject that the Secretary of War ever said that. However, the President has made it quite clear that if narco-terrorists, again, are trafficking illegal drugs towards the United States, he has the authority to kill them. And that's what this administration is doing.
What say you, Justin?
Yeah, it's pretty complicated here. I mean, we're agonizing over whether the so-called double tap strike, that is to say the second strike on men who were not killed in the initial strike, was legal. But I think the legality of the overall policy is very much in question, right? The administration is saying sort of at different times the United States is at war with narco traffickers. But then when they say, okay, well, then you're bound by the law of armed conflict, they say, no, we're not. They say because they've designated the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization, it's a sort of free fire zone internationally when they decide. And that they're just making legal claims that, I should confess I'm not a lawyer, but that really strain credulity to the breaking point. So I think there's going to be a week-long maybe news cycle where the blame for this double tap strike is going to get passed back and forth from Hegseth to the SOCOM commander. But I think that's missing the forest for the trees in the sense of we need a political and indeed a legal story about why we're doing what we're doing and how it's being justified.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, I mean, you could certainly make the arguments, but it seems to me in terms of these strikes per the designations that are within the president's purview, are also within his purview. Now, if there was some sort of land operation in Venezuela or bombings of a sovereign country, I think that would be a different story. And regardless of the arguments, I think it just would be judicious for Trump to go to Congress on that and, call the question. And if some people want to take a hands-off approach to Maduro, and that narco regime, then the record doing it. But so I think, I think there's a distinction there. Marco Rubio's made that distinction too between those strikes in international waters with boats that are have been, through our intel, identified as the vehicles of narco traffickers. Versus some sort of direct strike on Venezuela and the Maduro regime. And apparently the reporting is that Trump's call with Maduro included "you should step away" message.
Yeah, he said that he and his family could abscond from the country immediately, and Maduro probably unsurprisingly passed on that deal. So the real dilemma now is once you have the sword out of its scabbard, if you don't get what you want, you put it back in, right? I mean, that's the dilemma. He's got 10% of the U.S. Navy in the Caribbean. He's got the Ford Carrier Strike Group, which is the biggest aircraft carrier in the U.S. Navy, tooling around there. And if Maduro doesn't knuckle under, then the question becomes, what do you do? And I think there are different voices inside the administration, some of which clearly have wanted regime change in Venezuela for a long time, and others that have maybe overlapping but separate motivations for the policy. So if what we're trying to do is to win the war on drugs by striking small boats in the Caribbean, I feel confident, more confident than I really feel ever, that it's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, it seems to me with Trump escalating against Maduro that this is, those tactics are a means to a larger strategy, which is regime change. There's no other way to say it. And for those, and I wonder if you agree with this, I mean, for those concerned, well, what comes next, that could be worse than Maduro? Probably not. And there's a pretty strong argument to be made that Nobel laureate now, Maria Corina Machado, and Edmundo Gonzalez would be waiting in the wings to assume control if Maduro abdicated or was somehow deposed, and that would be a pretty significant improvement with the situation in Venezuela.
For sure, nobody should be shedding a tear if Maduro were to take a fall down the flight of stairs or something like this. I mean, he's a terrible dictator. The question becomes, and even when you listen to Machado herself, she talks about the extent to which the institutions of the Venezuelan state have been hollowed out and have been replaced by, among other things, sort of organized crime, complete kleptocracy, et cetera, and then the question becomes, all right, certainly the problem is that the fish has rotted from the head, but if you remove the leader in Venezuela and put in a different leader, the institutions are going to feel roughly the same. And so then you have a problem of reforming these terrible, dysfunctional institutions while you're under great pressure politically inside Venezuela to make things better. And so it's not for me to say whether Venezuelans should overthrow their dictator. That's up to Venezuelans. But I think if we put that on the U.S. military's punch list, then everything that happens subsequent to that in Venezuela is going to be above the fold in the New York Times saying, Trump set Venezuela on fire and walked away. And so I hope that the people inside the administration are aware of that and thinking about to what extent they're going to own whatever comes next.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Justin Logan is the Director of Defense and Foreign Policy Studies at the CATO Institute. Justin, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim.
And Justin joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
We've all been there. It's the opening night of the school play, or it's the piano or dance recital, or maybe it's the Christmas pageant at your church. And everyone's fumbling with their phones, leaning and straining to get the perfect snapshot of that special moment. And too often, the images come out blurry, crooked, or overexposed. For the big events in the life of your church or school, trust Tom Killoran Photography. This locally owned family business can provide the solutions you need for your important event photography. They've worked with dance studios, orchestras, and sports teams to capture those memorable moments that you want to last a lifetime. And they can do the same for you and your organization. Tom Killoran Photography is also the official photographer for AM 560 The Answer.